from the Washington Post. And it's total trash, but we're still going to read it because it has some updates and developments. The Israeli directive comes amid glimmers of hope for a ceasefire as negotiations resume in Qatar.
Israel issued a sweeping directive for all Palestinians to leave Gaza City on Wednesday, sowing mass confusion and fear among hundreds of thousands of affected residents. Leaflets dropped over Gaza City warned it was a dangerous combat zone and told civilians to flee south along 2 designated routes and toward shelters in central Gaza. Gazans and humanitarian groups have repeatedly warned there is no place in the territory safe from Israel's 9-month-long air and ground assault that has devastated the enclave. Designated humanitarian zones are also crammed with those fleeing the fighting, leaving little room for new arrivals. More than 6 hours after the leaflets were dropped, the Israel Defense Force contacted the Washington Post to clarify that it was not issuing an order, but an evacuation recommendation because the area was too dangerous for people to remain. 2 days earlier, Israeli forces issued evacuation orders for about half of Gaza's largest city. Wednesday's recommendations marked the broadest expansion yet of Israel's renewed assault on Gaza City, which began in late June. The Israel Defense Forces said its renewed assault on Gaza City is aimed at rooting out Hamas fighters who have regrouped in the area. Israeli forces withdrew from the city in January but have since returned for targeted operations. It remains unclear how many people have fled the city so far. Israel ordered residents to evacuate Gaza City in the war's first weeks and in subsequent orders in the months since, but some 300,000 residents remained, according to UN estimates. Mahmoud Basal, a spokesperson for the Gaza Civil Defense, told the Washington Post that the city has already been a combat zone for 10 months, and that people realize that death will follow them everywhere. There was just a report done, mentioned in a bunch of publications. They're estimating some 200,000 direct and indirect deaths of Palestinians have occurred since October 7th, and those are probably conservative numbers. The broadening assault has already forced 2 hospitals to close and patients to evacuate, according to the World Health Organization, adding further stress to Gaza's already collapsing health system. The Palestine Red Crescent said in a statement Wednesday on X, formerly Twitter, that its emergency services could not reach the sick and wounded. Operation Room teams are receiving dozens of humanitarian distress calls from Gaza City, but our ambulance teams are unable to reach them due to the danger of the targeted areas and the intensity of the bombardment, it said. Ceasefire and hostage release negotiations are resuming in Doha on Wednesday, and an Israeli delegation has left for the Qatari capital to continue talks, which have so far stalled. An Israeli official speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive issues confirmed to the Washington Post. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Israel has eliminated or injured 60% of Hamas fighters after 9 months of conflict. He said in remarks to the Knesset that the vast majority of battalions have been dismantled.
But how many have they created in the process?
True. And how does he know that?
Yeah.
Because they won't share their numbers of their losses or their figures for their what they think the civilian losses are.
What they mean is that they have already eliminated 60% of the Palestinian people.
Yeah, 60% of the
they're
male
almost done with them.
of the male Palestinian population, combat ready. A husband and wife were identified as the 2 people killed in a Hezbollah rocket attack Tuesday on the Golan Heights. The Golan Regional Council said Wednesday that Noah and Nir Barnanes, parents of the 3 children, were killed in the attack while they were heading home. The entire Golan community is shocked, grieving, and mourning, it said. The IDF said it was looking into reports that civilians were harmed in an attack near a school in eastern Khan Yunis. The Gaza Health Ministry said at least 25 people were killed and 53 were injured in the strike. The school had been sheltering displaced people. The IDF said it used precise munition, striking a terrorist from Hamas's military wing who allegedly participated in the group's October 7th attack on Israel. The incident is under review, the IDF said. I mean, these are clearly lies, and they just continue committing atrocities. It's sickening. It has to end. There has to be a ceasefire now.
I mean, the trampolines that were at that school must have been really threatening.
This is from The Intercept by Ken Klippenstein. The Pentagon fails 6th audit in a row, claiming progress sort of beneath the surface. The Defense Department passed the same paltry number of sub-audits as it did last year, and would not say if it would ever see a clean audit.
The U.S. military appears unfazed in its inability to account for billions of dollars. On Thursday, the Department of Defense failed its 6th consecutive audit, but held its incremental progress. As the Pentagon budget nears a watershed $1 trillion, the largest of any federal government agency, it has never passed a single one of the annual audits mandated by Congress. In a press briefing, the Department of Defense said it had no time for passing an audit. We've heard the same platitudes about audit progress for years, said Julia Gledhill, an analyst at the Project on Government Oversight's Center for Defense Information. They're meaningless, especially since the Pentagon can't even commit a timeline for achieving a clean audit. Beginning in 2017, the audits are conducted by the Pentagon Inspector General along with the independent public accounting firms. The Defense Department is auditing at $3.8 trillion in assets and $4 trillion in liabilities. The Defense Department insists that the latest failure shows growth, a claim for which there does not appear to be any evidence. The Pentagon failed as many of its sub-audits this year as it did last year. We keep getting better and better at it.
We're learning,
Wow.
guys. We're still learning.
It's very Trump. We get better and better.
So better. The best better.
The best better, yes. I'm sorry, it's hard to say that with a straight face. We keep getting better and better at it, Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh said of the audit failure during a press briefing Thursday. I'll just say that we remain a trusted institution. Pentagon. I'm sorry. You mean we don't give you a choice? Pentagon Comptroller Michael J. McCord said during a separate press briefing about the audit, "We've made a lot of progress to date." When a reporter pushed back on McCord's claim, he conceded that the number of unmodified opinions, instances when an auditor concludes a financial statement is presented fairly, was unchanged since last year. It was static from last year, McCord said, but we still believe that we have seen signs of progress that were going to get us more favorable in the future. McCord also acknowledged that the number of disclaimers when auditees provide insufficient documentation to be audited had increased. And despite these facts, McCord pointed to subtle forms of progress. President Joe Biden has requested a record $886 billion Pentagon budget for the next financial year, a request that Republican Congress has sought to add another $88 billion to, even as they threaten a government shutdown over what they say is excessive government spending. Asked by a reporter when the Pentagon expects to pass an audit, Singh said that she can't predict the future, but that when the Pentagon did, she would let them know. Wow. Fucking wow. That's
Just on your own
amazing.
time, then.
That's amazing.
They really know who's boss.
Hey, today we decided that we passed the audit. I mean, we don't have any evidence that we passed the audit, but you're just gonna have to trust us.
We investigated ourselves.
And we found that we
done
are.
nothing wrong.
In a nod to the late Bush administration, Defense Chief Donald Rumsfeld, the reporter cracked, "It's a known unknown." On the one hand, the Pentagon is far and away the most complex federal agency, a senior researcher fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. But they have been legally required to pass an audit for decades and have clearly not made it a priority. As long as the money keeps flowing and there's no consequence for failure, he said, we can expect the Pentagon to fail audits year after year with no end in sight.
You know, it's always like we always got money for the military. We never have money for universal health care because we can't pay for it.
Updated school books, better education.
Homeless, how's the homeless? We could do so much with this.
Can
Even
we
halved.
can we even like just if we can't do anything else, can we consider fixing the pipes for like Flint, Michigan and everywhere else that's now being poisoned with lead and all the other cheap shit that you decided to put in the water to like basically poison all of us? Can we at least at bare minimum, can we give people safe tap water, safe drinking water at bare fucking minimum? Can we please do this? Wolfism?
Yes.
This is from People's World, Understanding Marxism, Understanding Wolfism. The 2008 crisis of capitalism sparked and regenerated interest in alternatives to the capitalist system, which was on the verge of collapsing anyway, which should collapse. This included revived interest in socialism, one of those results being the propelling of the obscure left-wing academic into history's headlights.
With appearances on TV shows, including Bill Moyers and Charlie Rose's programs, Economic Update, radio broadcasts, and packed live speaking engagements, the financial disaster made Professor Richard Wolff ready for his close-up. "I've got to pinch myself. I'm having the time of my life," a surprised Wolff said about suddenly being thrust into the prime time. As the visiting professor in the graduate program in International Affairs of the New School University, New York City observed, "It's not me, it's the message which has remained the same. Indeed, late August at the Left Coast Forum, I moderated a panel to commemorate the 200th anniversary of Karl Marx's birthday, and much to my astonishment, a standing room only attended the What is Marxism discussion that went into overtime at LA Trade Tech College. So there is a growing appetite and hunger for an anti-capitalist analysis to explain what's happening and for solutions. To supply this growing demand, Wolf has self-published a 100-page text that's somewhere between being a book and a pamphlet entitled Understanding Marxism. Like his personal appearances in the media and his lectures, this new text makes a valuable contribution to critiquing capitalism and enlightening readers with the socialist alternative. As Wolf has said, if you want to understand an economy, not only from the point of view of people who love it, but also from the point of view of people who are critical and think we can do better, then you need to study Marxian economics as part of any serious attempt to understand what's going on. Not to do it is to exclude yourself from the critical tradition. Of course, socialism and Marxism are multifaceted, complicated concepts and theories, and there are many different interpretations of what socialist thinkers like Marx believed. In the 1980s, the California-based Campaign for Economic Democracy estimated that there were scores of leftist tendencies and organizations offering a variety of conceptions as to what socialism was. Shortly before his death, I asked CED co-founder Tom Hayden exactly how many variants of socialist he thought there was. And former Chicago 7 defendant literally could remember if it was 60-something or 80-something, but the adherents of socialism include social democrats, democratic socialists, Leninists, Stalinists, Trotskyists, Maoists, anarchists, and of course, Marxists of various strains. A lot of in there.
We always talk about how the left is always so critical of one another. This is why. Yeah. There shouldn't be 60 to 80 something different.
There should be one socialism, and there should be like communist, yes or no.
Yes.
That's what you should be. That's maybe I'm just too simple-minded.
Maybe we should just make it simple so we stop we stop focusing all of our time tearing each other down and more time trying to actually do what we're saying we want to do.
Are you saying you wish we had more leftist solidarity?
I'm saying that I wish that we acted like it was 2024 and that we are intelligent and not a bunch of fucking apes.
And on the precipice of destruction?
Yeah,
on the precipice of generational genocide, climate change,
civil war, forcing people to have babies and stuff like that. That's, over time that's gonna...
Project 2025 is literally here.
Yeah. Hey, do you want equal rights for, everyone? Do you want the people that are CEOs sitting on their asses doing jack shit, making triple digit every single year while you struggle to make...
Yeah.
Want to have
do you want all the profits and wealth to be in the hands of the few?
Do you want to eat?
Do you want to keep struggling?
Let's fucking eat.
Do you want to help each other?
Let's fucking eat.
Understanding Marxism provides the socialist gospel according to Wolf. He states that Marx was formerly trained in philosophy and began his work life as a professor of philosophy. However, Wolf contends that Marx quickly became an economist, just as Wolf, who earned his BA from Harvard, a master's in economics from Stanford, and a PhD in economics from Yale, also is. So it's not surprising that in his slim volume, Wolf focuses on an economic aspect of Marxism, which he argues is the fulfillment of the democracy promised but unfulfilled by the bourgeoisie revolutions in countries like the U.S. in 1776 and France in 1789.
Yeah, we came here to get away from the rule of a king.
We turned around and we allow work to be our tyranny. We want to put democracy in the workplace.
Oh.
By the way, we've both, had showers today, so, it's not like we're, on here, complaining and not contributing to society. We, actually do contribute to society, have jobs and stuff like that. We just
also see that there's people that deserve to have a right to live and deserve to have a right to have a job and deserve to have a right to not be concerned about where their next meal comes from, if they can feed their kids, if they need to feed their kids or feed themselves. That's not right. It's just, I don't care if I feel like the next generation up above us, how they're all well, I did this, so I deserve this, and until you go through this, you don't deserve that. No, I don't give a fuck what you've been through. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you've never gotten a job before in your life and you literally are lazy. You still deserve a place to sleep. You still deserve food to eat. You still deserve water, a bath, a toilet. You deserve to be able to live your fucking life.
I don't care who you are. I'm going to force you to have health care. Unless you're a Nazi.
I said, yeah, you can still pay Nazis can still pay for that $10,000 ambulance ride.
Yeah. The heart of Wolff's argument centers on what Marx called surplus labor, which is what employers appropriate above their pay for wages. After further deducting raw materials, machinery, and the like used in the production process, what's left is the employer's profit. Wolff maintains that the fact that productive workers are not compensated for the full amount and worth of their labor constitutes exploitation. At the risk of sounding like a reductionist, the professor's interpretation of Marxism is based on the notion that the expropriators of the fruit of the labor created by the masses is accumulated by a tiny percentage of the population, what we call the 1%, which controls what happens with that surplus labor. It is this relationship of production, Wolff insists, that has thwarted the democratic promises of the American, French, and other bourgeoisie revolutions.
You've said that word like 3 times. I just want to.
What?
Bourgeoisie.
Bourgeoisie?
Yeah.
Am I saying it wrong?
No, I think you're saying it right, but I just wanted to let you know. I don't know if it's.
Oh, I think more.
It's coming too. It's getting red. It's getting red coming up. What you're saying is everything.
You're about to say you're gonna get
Flagged for.
Yep.
Yeah.
Congratulations, we're now going to be Russian bots. You know why? Because we think that capitalism is bullshit.
It is this what?
We want to eat.
Yeah, did you hear my stomach?
Yes.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Right. It is this relationship of production, Wolff insists, that has thwarted the democratic promises of the American, French, and other bourgeoisie revolutions. This system of minority rule over ownership, with surplus labor serving mainly to enrich the capitalist class at the expense of the working class, is also the cause of the staggering inequality that afflicts the world now, epitomized by the fact that the Disney CEO earns 1,400 times the salary of a typical employee of the company. We can do better than capitalism.
And we're not just like the youth that's complaining because like, oh, we have it so hard. Let's just point out that it doesn't matter that 2 adults with children in our generation now do not own homes, do not have multi-cars. The generation before us have already owned several homes and sold a home and moved to a new home and owned several different cars throughout the time with only one parent working and one staying home with the children.
That's fucking unheard of now.
We can't do that now. We're too busy trying to live with our parents because we can't even afford rent.
Try buying a house making less than $250,000 a year now.
It's unheard of. And then you also have to save so much to even put a down payment. It's ridiculous. That's not even.
For Wolff, socialism is the fulfillment of the dream of democracy, by making the producers not only the creators but the masters of their surplus labor. How is it created? What is created? How is the surplus distributed? What are the products exchanged for? This would be done in a democratic way, with the workers voting on these concerns, as democracy is extended way beyond voting for politicians and even ballot initiatives, to the factory floor, to the office, etc.
Could you
Workplace
just imagine,
democracy.
Could you imagine for just 1 second having that much say and control in your own life? Could you imagine that? Like, I can't even fathom it.
What kind of pride you could have.
I can't imagine a workplace giving any kind of care about what I think and or feel about my compensation or anything else. They don't. Most of us are even too afraid to ask for a pay raise that we would accurately deserve because of the way things are done. I couldn't even imagine. That's insane. That's insanity to me. I couldn't imagine having that much power in my own life. No, I don't get to make those.
You master your own destiny.
I can't even control my own body. So what does it matter?
That's not funny.
It's the truth, though.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to have a say in my own body. So
Getting there.
yeah, I feel like all my rights are being taken away as an American.
As previously noted, just as right-wing Opus Dei and left-wing liberation theory both spring from Christianity, Marxism is very complex and subject to extremely different interpretations. For instance, as an economist, Wolff concentrates on Marx's economics, especially as developed by the older Marx in books such as 1867's Das Kapital, but those of a more philosophical bent could instead stress the younger Marx's theories on alienation as expressed in works like 1844's economic and philosophical manuscripts as socialist humanists like Erich Fromm did. So Marxists of different stripes may disagree with the take issue with some of the hypothesis on Wolff, whose version of Marxism could be called Wolffism. In his lectures and here, Professor Wolff focuses on the democratization of the workplace. The emphasis on the latter reminds me of the early 19th century utopian socialist Francois Marie Charles Fourier, and the notion of phalanxes as models of cooperative labor. But socialism is more than a matter of workplace referendums, with workers at the point of production where products are manufactured, running and benefiting from the enterprises they toil in. Beyond this, how will the workers exercise their ownership of the means of production, unifying and harnessing the productive forces of these thousands of communally owned collectives and cooperatives on a national or even international level? There is little, if anything, about this in understanding Marxism. Supporters of Soviet-style socialism would likely advocate some kind of centralized planning, though much of the actual existing socialist societies now have integrated many aspects of the free market economy. For the 21st century, instead of unelected bureaucrats being in charge of the decision-making process, the trick would be, how would the producers be empowered through participatory direct democracy to self-manage this planning on a broad societal scale themselves, and how would they coordinate production with all the rest of the working class for the common good of all? Wolff is correct when he notes in Chapter 7 of Understanding Marxism that Marx himself said and wrote little about the future of capitalism. However, with the emphasis on democracy, the professor never once mentions a central tenet of Marxism, the dictatorship of the proletariat. I suspect that, given the scepter of the police state, connotations of various Stalinist societies, Wolff did not care to muddy the waters of his democratic workers' cooperatives with the mention of the word dictatorship. More militant interpreters of Marx, who are to the left of Wolff, might quote Marx, who, after Europe's 1848 workers' uprisings, wrote in a German newspaper, "Every provisional state set up after a revolution requires a dictatorship, and an energetic dictatorship at that." I believe Marx was referring to the exercise of majority rule, ensuring and enabling the dominance of the 99% over the 1%. As George Orwell put it when describing radicalized Barcelona during the Spanish Civil War, the working class was in the saddle. In order to place the workers in the saddle and, as Marx put it, expropriate the expropriators, a revolution is required, for the ruling class will never voluntarily give up their power, privilege, and wealth. It is inevitable to outcome of the class struggle. The guillotine and the Bastille, or credible threats of them, are the only things that Trumps and their ilk understand. Although Wolff references the American and French revolutions when it comes to establishing socialism in his text Revolution is the act that dares not to say its name. But for Marx, it is a historical necessity. As he and Engels wrote in 1848's The Communist Manifesto, the immediate aim of the communists is the same as to that of all of other proletarian parties: constitution of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of bourgeoisie rule, conquest of political power by the proletariat. That overthrow would be via insurrectionary and not electoral means. Marxism without revolution is like pancakes without the syrup. Understanding Marxism also never addresses the subject of vanguard and or other political parties for the workers. Nevertheless, while Marxists of different persuasions may find the booklet to be limited in scope, it makes an important addition to our public discourse about the really pressing issues of the day. Understanding Marxism is a proletarian primer to help the masses comprehend some of the basics of a complicated worldview, as Wolff identifies some of the capitalist system's essential contradictions. In addition to most of the Communist Manifesto, other works that concisely, cogently illuminate Marxism's ABCs include Engels' 1880 Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, and while this may surprise some, Stalin's 1938 pamphlet, Dialectical and Historical Materialism, is an easy read to work, elucidating the building blocks of Marxist methodology. Like his predecessors, Professor Richard Wolff puts his finger on elements of Marxist theories that are relevant for understanding and, more importantly, changing the contemporary world.
We are the first generation whose kids were worse off than the previous. We are the first generation that wants more kids but can't afford it. We're fucking pissed. We want what's ours and we're not afraid to fucking take it. This is from The Communist. Che Guevara, 50 years after his death. 50 years ago today, Che Guevara was brutally executed by Bolivian soldiers, so ending the life of one of the great revolutionary figures of the 20th century. To commemorate Che's life and ideas, we republish here an in-depth article by Alan Woods, originally written 10 years ago, discussing Che's experiences and what he really stood for.
Lenin wrote in The State and Revolution, "What is now happening to Marxist theory has in the course of history happened repeatedly to the theories of revolutionary thinkers and leaders of oppressed classes fighting for emancipation. During the lifetime of great revolutionaries, the oppressing classes constantly hounded them, receiving their theories with the most savage malice, the most furious hatred, and the most unscrupulous campaigns of lies and slander. After their death, attempts were made to convert them into harmless icons, to canonize them, so to say, and to hollow their names to a certain extent for the consolation of the oppressed classes, and with the object of duping the latter, while at the same time robbing the revolutionary theory of its substance, blunting its revolutionary edge, and vulgarizing it. After his death, Guevara became an icon of socialist revolutionary movements and a key figure of modern pulp culture worldwide. The Albert Corda photo of Che has become famous, appearing on t-shirts and protest banners all over the world. Thus, Che has become an icon of our times. Ernesto Guevara de la Serna, generally known as Che Guevara, was a Marxist revolutionary, Argentinian by birth, but an internationalist to the marrow of his bones. His ancestry, like that of most people in Latin America, was very mixed.
Born into a middle-class family, he did not suffer poverty and hunger like so many other children in Latin America, but he suffered from ill health. His naturally adventurous and rebellious spirit was connected with the fact that from an early age he had serious asthmatic condition. He spent all his life trying to overcome this problem by deliberately driving himself to the limit. His steely determination to overcome all difficulties may also be tracked back to this. His humanitarian instincts first inclined him to the field of medicine. He obtained a medical degree. His specialty was dermatology, and he was particularly interested in leprosy. At this time, his horizons were no wider than those of most other middle-class young men. To work hard, get a degree in medicine, get a good job, and maybe do original research into medical science and advance human knowledge by some amazing discovery. Like most young people, Ernesto loved to travel. He was seized by what the Germans called wanderlust. He wrote, "I now know, by an unbelievable coincidence of fate, that I am destined to travel." Just how far he was to travel and in what direction he would go was yet a sealed book to him. No doubt he would have made a conscientious physician, but the wanderlust got the better of him. He took to the road and did not return to Argentina for many years. His adventurous nature introduced him to set out to a long journey traveling rough throughout South America on a motorbike. This journey was the beginning of a long odyssey that slowly opened his eyes to the reality of the world in which he lived. For the first time in his life, he was brought into direct contact with impoverished and oppressed masses of the continent. He witnessed at first hand the appalling conditions in which the majority of people lived. That such dreadful poverty should exist amidst all the natural wealth and beauty of this wonderful continent made a deep impression on this young mind. Suddenly, all his earlier ambitions for personal advancement seemed petty and uninteresting. After all, a doctor can cure individual patients, but who can cure the terrible disease of poverty? The terrible disease of poverty, illiteracy, homelessness, and oppression. One cannot cure cancer with an aspirin, and one cannot cure the underlying ills of society with palliatives and half measures. Slowly, in the mind of this young man, a revolutionary idea was maturing and developing. He did not immediately become a Marxist. Who does? He thought long and hard and read widely, a habit that never left him to the end of his life. He began to study Marxism, gradually, imperceptibly, but with a steely inevitability. He became convinced that the problems of the masses could only be remedied by revolutionary means. His conversion to conscious Marxism received a decisive impetus when he went to Guatemala to learn about the reforms being implemented there by President Jacob Arbenz Guzman. In December 1953, Che arrived in Guatemala, where Guzman headed a reformist government, which was attempting to carry out a land reform and demolish the latifundia system. But the United Fruit Company and the CIA had other ideas. They organized a coup attempt led by Carlos Castillo Armas, with U.S. air support. Guevara immediately joined an armed militia organized by the communist youth, but was frustrated with the group's inaction. After the coup, the arrests began, and Che had to seek refuge in the Argentina consulate, where he remained until he received a safe conduct pass. He then decided to make his way to Mexico. His experience of the U.S.-sponsored coup against Arbenz confirmed him in his views and led him to draw certain conclusions. and concentrated Che Guevara's mind on the role of the United States in Latin America. Here was an imperialist power that was a bulwark of all the reactionary forces throughout the continent. Any government that tried to change society would inevitably face the implacable opposition of a powerful and ruthless enemy. After the victory of the CIA-inspired coup, Che was forced to flee to Mexico, where in 1956 he joined Fidel Castro's revolutionary 26th of July movement, which was engaged in a ferocious struggle against the dictatorship of General...
Just say Batista.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do what?
Just say Batista.
Okay. Against the dictatorship of General Batista in Cuba. The two men seemed to strike up an immediate rapport, and Castro needed reliable men, and Che needed an organization and a cause for which to fight. He had seen with his own eyes the fatal weakness of reformism, and this confirmed to him the belief that socialism could only be achieved through armed struggle. He arrived in Mexico City in early September 1954 and entered into contact with Cuban exiles whom he had met in Guatemala. Che immediately joined the 26th of July movement that was planning to overthrow the dictatorship of Batista. At first, Che was supposed to play a medical role. His poor health, which he suffered from asthma all his life, did not suggest a warrior's constitution. Nevertheless, he participated in military training side by side with the other members of the movement and proved his worth. On November 25th, 1956, the cabin cruiser Grandma, I'm trying to not make it sound like Grandma set out from Tuxpan, Veracruz, heading for Cuba, loaded with revolutionaries. It was an old ship, and it was carrying many more people than it was designed for. It nearly sank in the heavy weather that reduced many of the passengers to severe seasickness. This was only the beginning of their problems. The expedition was almost destroyed right at the outset. They landed in the wrong place and were caught in the swamps. They were attacked by government troops soon after landing, and about half of the rebels were killed or executed after being captured. Only 15 to 20 survived. This battered and depleted force somehow managed to regroup and escape into the Sierra Maestra Mountains, from where they waged a guerrilla war against the Batista dictatorship. Despite the initial setback, the rebels had struck a courageous blow, which resonated in the hearts and minds of the masses, and especially the youth. New recruits filled up the depleted ranks. The guerrilla war spread throughout eastern Cuba. Che had been taken on as a medic, but in the heat of battle, he had to make up his mind whether he could serve the cause best as a doctor or as a fighter. Perhaps this was the first time I was confronted with the real-life dilemma of having to choose between my devotion to medicine and my duty as a revolutionary soldier. Lying at my feet were a knapsack full of medicine and a box of ammunition. They were too heavy for me to carry both of them. I got the box of ammunition, leaving the medicine behind. The main strength of the rebellion lay in the chronic weakness which was internally rotted with corruption and decay. Despite the support, money and arms of U.S. imperialism, Batista was unable to check the advance of the revolution. His soldiers were unwilling to risk their lives to defend a diseased regime. Weakened and demoralized by a series of ambushes, the army was already thoroughly demoralized when the final offense was launched. In this campaign, Che became a comandante, gaining a reputation for courage, bravery, and military skill. He was now second only to Fidel Castro himself. In the final days of December 1958, Comandante Guevara and his column of fighters headed west for the final push towards Havana. This column undertook the most dangerous tasks in the decisive attack on Santa Clara. The final orders to the rebel army were issued from Palma on January 1st, 1959, but the final blow that finished off the dictatorship was the general strike of the workers of Havana. The whole edifice was collapsing like a house of cards. Batista's generals were attempting to negotiate a separate peace with the rebels. When he learned of this, the dictator realized that the game was up and fled to the Dominican Republic on New Year's Day, 1959. The old bourgeoisie state had been smashed and a new power was formed, or rather, improvised, on the basis of the guerrilla army. Power now passed into the hands of the guerrilla army. Marxists all over the world rejoice at the victory of the Cuban Revolution. This was a heavy blow struck at imperialism, capitalism, and landlordism on the doorstep of the most powerful imperialist state in history. It gave hope to the oppressed masses everywhere. The dictatorship of the proletariat. Marx explained that the workers cannot simply lay hold of the old state apparatus and use it to change society. Marx explained that the old state could not serve as an instrument to change society. It had to be destroyed and replaced with a new state power, a worker state, that would be completely different to the old state machine. In any revolution, where the leading role is not played by the working class, but other forces, certain things will inevitably flow. There is always a tendency for the state to rise above the rest of society, and even the most dedicated people can be corrupted or lose contact with the masses under certain circumstances. That's why Lenin devised his famous 4 conditions for workers' power. 1. Free and democratic elections with right of recall of all officials. 2. No official to receive a higher wage than a skilled worker. 3. No standing army, but the armed people. 4. Gradually all the tasks of running society to be done by everybody in turn. When everybody is a bureaucrat, nobody is a bureaucrat.
So we gotta force healthcare down their throat.
Healthcare, you should just
So
fucking
scary.
wanna.
So scary, guys. No. I don't want to. I want to pay an arm and a leg for medical procedures that maintain basic life.
You don't force healthcare on me, but you force me to not have an abortion and take care of a kid, then you're going to pay for all the process between the pregnancy beginning and the time that they graduate the house and the time that they are old enough to be out on their own. You're going to help take care of them if you're going to make me have them. Plain and simple. If you're not going to put in the effort to help raise your child too, because you're acting like a fucking stepdaddy, like a daddy, all right?
Uncle Sam's my dad.
So if you wanna have a say in what happens in my vagina, in my uterus, then you're gonna pay your fucking part too.
Yeah. These conditions are not an arbitrary idea of Lenin. In a nationalized, planned economy, it is absolutely necessary to ensure the maximum participation of the masses in the running of industry, society, and the state. Without there will inevitably be a tendency towards bureaucratism, corruption, and mismanagement, which can ultimately undermine and destroy the planned economy from within. That is just what happened to the USSR. The points raised by Lenin have an important bearing on the events in Cuba and on Che's own evolution. Che occupied various posts in the Revolutionary Administration. He worked at the National Institute of Agrarian Reform and was president of the National Bank of Cuba. When he signed banknotes with his nickname Che, all this time Guevara refused his official salaries of office, drawing only his lowly wage as an army commander. This little detail tells us a lot about the man. He maintained what he did in this order to set a revolutionary example. In fact, he was following to the letter the principle laid down by Lenin in State and Revolution that no official in the Soviet state could receive a salary higher than a skilled worker. This was an anti-bureaucratic measure. Lenin, like Marx, was well aware of the danger of the state raising itself above society, and that this danger also existed in a worker state.
Taking as his point of departure Marx and Engels' analysis of the Paris Commune, Lenin put forward 4 key points to fight bureaucracy in the worker state in 1917. We shall reduce the role of state officials, wrote Lenin, to that of simply carrying out their instructions as responsible, revocable, modest paid foremen and accountants, of course with the aid of technicians of all sorts, types, and degrees. This is our proletarian task. This is what we can and must start with in accomplishing the proletarian revolution. Not only in theory, but in practice, Che adhered to similar revolutionary principles. Che Guevara was an instinctive revolutionary. He was personally incorruptible and detested bureaucracy, careerism, and privileges. His was the stern and Puritan morality of the revolutionary fighter. Therefore, he was repelled by the manifestations of bureaucracy and flunkeyism that he observed after the victory of the revolution. Che often expressed opinions in opposition of the official positions of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union under Nikita Khrushchev. He was opposed to the theory of peaceful coexistence. He did not like the slavish attitude of some Cubans towards Moscow and his ideology. Above all, bureaucracy, careerism, and privilege repelled him. His visits to Russia and Eastern Europe shocked him and deepened his sense of disillusionment with Stalinism. The bureaucracy, privileges, and suffocating conformism repelled him to the depth of his soul. He became increasingly critical of the Soviet Union and its leaders. That is why he initially inclined to China in the Sino-Soviet dispute. But to portray Che as a Maoist is to do him an injustice. There is no reason to believe that he would have felt any more at home in Mao's China than in Khrushchev's Russia. The reason he appeared to lean to China was that the Chinese criticized Moscow's decision to remove the Soviet missiles from Cuba, an act that Che looked on as betrayal. It was impossible to arrive at a neat classification of Che Guevara. He was a complex character with a fertile brain that was always seeking after truth. The dogmas of Stalinism were the absolute antithesis of his way of thinking. He was repelled by bureaucratic civility and conformism and detested privilege of any sort. This made him an object of suspicion to visiting communist dignitaries from Europe and the Soviet bloc. The Stalinist leader of the French Communist Party were particularly hostile to him. Guevara later served as Minister of Industries, in which post he grappled with the problems of building a socialist planned economy in the difficult conditions that confronted the Cuban Revolution. My good friend and comrade Leon Ferrara, the veteran Cuban skiist, worked with Che in the ministry and had many discussions with him about Trotsky and Trotskyism. He gave him Trotsky's book to read, and he showed some interest in them, but there was one point he could not grasp. Trotsky writes a lot about the bureaucracy, and what does this mean? Leon explained as best he could, and after a while Che said, "Yes, I think I understand what you mean." The next day, Che and Leon were together cutting sugar cane in the fields. In the middle of this back-breaking work, Leon saw a big black car slowly advancing across the field. He turned to Che. "Comrade, it looks like you have a visitor," he said. "Commandante, it looks like you have a visitor," he said. Che looked up, surprised, and saw the limousine. Then his face lit up with a smile, and he said to Leon, "Now just you watch this." The car came to a halt, and a sweating official with a suit and tie stepped out and began to walk towards Che. Before he could open his mouth, Che shouted at him, "What are you doing here? Get out! We don't want any bureaucrats here." The shamefaced functionary turned back and headed for the car, and Che turned to Leon. "You see?" he said with a triumphant grin. "No solicitors!" And he leaves, and he's like,
When the Cuban Trotskyists were arrested, Che personally intervened to secure their release. He later said that this had been a mistake. He also proposed the study of the writings of Leon Trotsky, who he regarded as one of the unorthodox Marxists. This attitude was very different to the position of the followers of Mao, who described Trotsky as a counter-revolutionary and enemy of socialism. Given the extremely difficult conditions of guerrilla war in the mountains and jungles, a fighter will only take what he regards as absolutely necessary. This tells us a lot about how Che was thinking at this time. We have no doubt that had he lived, he would have moved towards Trotskyism, and in fact, he was already doing so before his life was cut short. Che Guevara was a dedicated revolutionary and communist. He was also an internationalist and understood that to defend the Cuban Revolution, it was necessary to spread it to other parts of the world. He attempted this in Africa and Latin America. This was his strong side. His weak side was that he saw the revolution fundamentally as a peasant guerrilla struggle and did not fully understand the central role of the working class in the socialist revolution. The anniversary of the assassination of Che Guevara has been the signal for a noisy campaign against him. The attacks against Che do not all come from the right. There are constant attacks from anarchists, libertarians, and all kinds of Democrats. Writer Paul Berman informs us that the modern day cult of Che obscures the work of dissidents and what he believes is a tremendous social struggle currently taking place in Cuba. There is indeed a tremendous social struggle taking place in Cuba. It is a struggle between revolution and counter-revolution, a struggle between those who wish to defend the gains of the Cuban Revolution and those who, under the false flag of democracy, wish to drag Cuba towards capitalist slavery, as has already happened in Russia. In this struggle, it is not possible to be neutral, and these democratic intellectuals have openly taken the side of the capitalist counter-revolution. Another one of these scoundrels, author Christopher Hitchens, once considered himself a socialist and a supporter of the Cuban Revolution, but now, like so many others of the middle-class fair-weather friends of Cuba, has changed his mind. Of Che Guevara's legacy, he writes, "Che's iconic status was assured because he failed. His story was one of defeat and isolation, and that's why it's so seductive. Had he lived, the myth of Che would have long since died." No, my friend, Che Guevara is not dead, but very much alive, and he will be remembered long after all this miserable tribe of bourgeoisie Pharisees has been forgotten. Yes, Che was defeated, but at least he had the courage to try to fight, and it is 1,000 times better to try to fight and fail honorably in battle for a just cause than to chatter and complain and whimper from the sidelines of history and to do precisely nothing.
In the beginning, Castro did not put forward a socialist perspective and did not nationalize anything. Che, on the other hand, insisted that the Cuban Revolution must be a socialist revolution. The revolution soon entered into conflict with U.S. imperialism, which attempted to sabotage its attempts to carry out agrarian reform and other measures to improve the living standards of the masses. The big U.S. companies tried to sabotage the Cuban economy. Castro responded by nationalizing all U.S. property in Cuba. The revolution had crossed the Rubicon. It had expropriated the landlords and capitalists and was now on a collision course with Washington. This was a complete confirmation of Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution, a theory that Che was so interested in that he took a copy of this book with him on his final Bolivian expedition. Trotsky explained that in modern conditions, the task of the bourgeoisie, democratic revolution, in colonial and ex-colonial countries cannot be carried out by the bourgeoisie, but can only be realized by expropriating the landlords and capitalists and beginning the socialist transformation of society. The Cuban Revolution was in danger. How was it to be saved? Che Guevara had the right idea and was moving in the right direction before his young life was brutally ended. He was radically opposed to bureaucracy, corruption, and privilege, which are today the biggest threat to the Cuban Revolution, and if not corrected, will prepare the way for capitalist restoration. Above all, he understood that the only way to preserve the Cuban Revolution was to extend the socialist revolution to the rest of the world, beginning with Latin America. In his mind, the idea slowly matured that the only way to save the Cuban Revolution was to spread the revolution on a world scale. This idea was fundamentally correct. The isolation of the Cuban Revolution was the greatest threat to its survival. Che was not a man to allow an idea to remain on paper. He decided to translate it into action, and Che Guevara left Cuba in 1965 to participate in the revolutionary struggles in Africa. He first went to Congo, although his whereabouts remained a closely held secret for the next 2 years. Che wrote a letter in which he reaffirmed his solidarity with the Cuban Revolution, but declared his intention to leave Cuba to fight abroad for the cause of the revolution. He stated that other nations of the world summoned my modest efforts, and that he had therefore decided to go and fight as a guerrilla on new battlefields in order not to embarrass the Cuban government and provide excuses to the imperialists to attack Cuba. He announced his resignation from all his positions in the government, in the party, and in the armed forces, and renounced his Cuban citizenship, which had been granted to him in 1959 in recognition of his efforts on behalf of the revolution. Imagine having an idea to not only bring up your own people, but then also to sit back and realize hey, what if we were all like this?
Mm-hmm.
After the failure in Africa, Che decided to attempt a new revolutionary front in Latin America. He seems to have chosen Bolivia for its strategic position, bordering a number of important countries, including Argentina. He adopted the disguise of a businessman with thick glasses and a shaved head. This was so perfect that when he said his final goodbye to his little daughter, she did not recognize him. However, the imperialists were not so easily fooled. Che clearly made a mistake when he tried to organize a guerrilla war in Bolivia, a country with a powerful working class with great revolutionary traditions. He miscalculated in a number of areas. He expected to be confronted only by the poorly trained and equipped Bolivian army, but, as we have already pointed out, the imperialists had learned the lesson of Cuba and were prepared for him. Only 11 months after beginning the operation, the guerrillas were routed and Che Guevara was dead. Only 5 men managed to escape from the trap that had been prepared for them by the Bolivian army and its U.S. advisors.
To read today Che Guevara's Bolivian Diaries is a moving and tragic experience. The physical and mental sufferings of the small band of men are indescribable. Their final destiny is heartbreaking. He established his base in the jungles of a remote region, but building a guerrilla army under such conditions proved extremely difficult, as his Bolivian diary shows. But to start a revolution in the jungles of Bolivia was a hopeless venture from the start. The total guerrilla force numbered only about 50. they experienced great difficulty recruiting from the local populace who did not even speak Spanish. Despite the attempts to portray him as a bloodthirsty monster, what revolutionary leader has not been so portrayed? Che was actually a very humanitarian person. In one very moving passage of his Bolivian diaries, he recalls a moment when he could have shot a young Bolivian soldier but found himself unable to pull the trigger. This is hardly the conduct of a cruel and bloodthirsty man. Che personally gave medical treatment to wounded Bolivian soldiers whom the guerrillas took prisoner, and then let them go free. This humane behavior contrasts to the brutal treatment he himself received when he fell into the hands of the Bolivian army. It is even said when captured, he offered to treat some Bolivian soldiers who had been wounded in the fighting. The Bolivian officer in charge rejected his offer. The dead body was lashed on the landing skids of a helicopter and flown to neighboring Valle Grande, where it was placed in a laundry tub in a local hospital and put on display for the gentlemen of the press who took photographs. In an act of desecration, a military doctor surgically amputated his hands. Bolivian army officers transferred Guevara's cadaver to an undisclosed location. After his tragic death, there have been many attempts to turn Che Guevara into a harmless icon, a face on a t-shirt. He is presented by the bourgeoisie as a well-meaning romantic, a utopian idealist. This is unworthy of the memory of a great revolutionist. Che Guevara was not a hopeless dreamer, but a revolutionary realist. It was not an accident that Che attempted to extend the revolution to other countries, not just in Latin America, but also in Africa. He understood very well that in the last analysis, the future of the Cuban Revolution would be determined by this. The idea of Che was to open up 20 Vietnams in Latin America. This was not a bad idea, but it was not possible at that time, partly because the conditions had not ripened sufficiently, but mainly because of the false model of guerrilla war that was followed. But now things are different. The crisis of capitalism has had devastating effects in Latin America, and this has had revolutionary consequences. The conditions for revolution are maturing everywhere. In fact, at the present time, there is not a single stable capitalist regime from Tela de Fulango to the Rio Grande. With correct leadership, there is no reason why successful proletarian revolutions should not occur in one or several Latin American countries in the next period. What is needed is not nationalism in blocks with a reactionary bourgeoisie, but a revolutionary socialist program and a revolutionary proletarian internationalism.
If he would have succeeded in Africa, think of all the wars and stuff that have happened since then. Because I know Africa is like a big spot where there's a lot of genocides that don't get covered. Just think of all of that could have been avoided.
These would be a lot different.
Things would be a lot different. Imagine if we would have had socialism and we could be like, I don't know, happy and working towards positive climate change and working together with other countries to exchange things and be happy and blah, 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 blah.
The aliens would have came by now. You guys seem cool.
Yeah,
we weren't sure at first, but you guys pulled through.
I mean, honestly, if I was an alien and I seen how we treated just the same species of a different shade, I wouldn't fucking show my face. No way. These people are insane.
Right.
They are crazy. They are just going to annihilate all of us, and they're not even going to hear us out when we try to get them to join the international space revolution, blah, 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 where we give them technology that is beyond their understanding that could actually ultimately save the planet, where the seas are boiling and our coral reefs are bleaching and everything's turning to shit.
You know, if Che Guevara had lived, I think the whole world would have had a revolution, and we would have sent Che to the stars on a probe, and he would have brought communism to the galaxy.
I want to see his face on a rocket.